This video is sponsored by Dinosaur Polo Club and their game Mini Motorways. Stay to the end to learn more. On November 4th, 1970, David Bowie released his third studio album titled The Man Who Sold the World. This album would see Bowie take a drastic shift in lyrical and musical tone, one much darker than his previous Space Oddity and self-titled. While cryptic, the themes presented through this album, and specifically the title track, can be seen as the struggle with identity and longing for finding a piece of yourself that's missing. The Man Who Sold the World wasn't a fairly well-known song on release. It only became a hit later when Scottish singer Lulu released a cover for it, and has since become famous as a song other artists like to cover. The song is dark and melancholic. It's fitting that other artists, often a few years deep into their career and potentially struggling with losing a piece of who they are in the face of fame, cover it. While all popular versions of Bowie's song bring their own flavor to the composition, it could be argued the most beloved version of the song is Midge Ure's new wave twist. With its lo-fi instrumentation, it adds a lot of enigma to a song already drenched in mystery and interpretation. So it's no wonder Hideo Kojima reached for the cover when he needed a powerful moment. After a tumultuous development cycle, Metal Gear Solid 5 released September 1st, 2015, and acted as legendary game designer Kojima's swan song with a company he'd been a part of for 30 years, and built his legacy alongside of. The game opens with its protagonist, Venom Snake, in front of a mirror, alone in a room. He turns on a Walkman with a tape, playing Yuri's rendition of The Man Who Sold the World, as the scene fades to black and the opening credits roll. As they end, the song shifts to diegetic and can be heard over the speakers in the recovery room, where we find Snake has lost a piece of himself, his arm. The big twist for Metal Gear Solid 5 is that Venom Snake isn't who we or even he thinks he is. He's just a field medic that got plastic surgery to act as a decoy while Big Boss wages a covert war. This can also be seen by the replacement of Snake's iconic voice actor, David Hayter, with Kiefer Sutherland. During the development of the final game of the franchise, problems between Konami and Kojima got bad. The company forced him to work alone in a room. The Man Who Sold the World is used as a bitter intro from a man who lost a piece of himself and was about to face his own identity and prestige alone for the first time. Yuri's cover also parallels Venom Snake's dilemma. It's an imitation, a fantastic one to be sure, but it's not the real deal. It represents the sadness of a man whose uncertain identity adds a depth of melancholy to a simple press of a play button. This is maybe my favorite use of a needle drop in a video game. I know that sounds like a niche interest, but honestly, as I dug deeper and deeper into these moments, it's a far more common trope than I ever expected, and is honestly the reason for a lot of gaming's most memorable moments. For the uninitiated about what a needle drop is, and I'm not talking about the busiest music nerd on the internet, let me explain quickly. Starting as a technique used in film, it's the idea of using a pre-existing song rather than one of an original composition. There is one distinction that needs to be made before continuing, however. It's a small but important one. A song that was written for a piece of media by a famous band, think Exile Vilify by The National for Portal 2, or Ludens by Bring Me the Horizon for Death Stranding, while great songs aren't technically considered needle drops since they weren't pre-existing songs. Since this particular moment is one created by Hideo Kojima, it's easy to add layers and layers of context that may not even be there, but given his attention to detail and love for theming David Bowie and cinematics, it's one that can very easily be true. Not all needle drops are built the same, but they are always the Swiss Army knives that set a game's tone. Even with Kojima himself, his first game after Metal Gear Solid 5, Death Stranding, opens in a similarly cinematic way. Sam Bridges rides his motorbike across a drearily green mountainside while Icelandic indie band Low Raw's song Don't Be So Serious plays, and the title sequence plays out. It's a beautifully shot sequence that perfectly introduces the game, and feels on the surface very similar to his previous game's introduction, but given that there's no history to be had with this game's development outside of it being the first game of a new studio he founded, it doesn't have the devastation of a mistreatment in the workplace, and instead can play as a triumph of overcoming the odds, and despite only finding the band randomly while sitting in a cafe while the album played on the speakers, it still makes for a memorable introduction regardless. Not all of these moments need to have a deep meaning or connection behind them to work. Sometimes the right song at the right moment is all that's required to feel special. With that said, a lot of the moments with original music are exceptional as well, but those can be tailor-made for their moments. It doesn't make them any less important to the culture of video games or the moment that they inhabit, but there's something to be said about finding the one song in an endless sea of bands and artists that the ability to pick the exact right one on its own is a special skill. And given that these songs were already available for people to have built a connection to, it can add to that pre-existing relationship or build something new on the foundation of one particular moment. For me, as someone who has outed themselves many times as having grown up as a non-video game music enjoyer, the use of licensed tracks I already knew helped keep me engaged in an experience and even opened me up to the idea of keeping games unmuted while I played them. A good example of this is Alan Wake. The inclusion of Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds in the soundtrack was actually the reason I picked it up. So when Chapter 3 closed out and Up Jumped the Devil's bassline kicked in, I got excitedly happy. It was the moment I became truly invested in the story. Before music became extremely accessible by way of streaming and online platforms, a good needle drop could inspire someone to dig through massive record store collections in search of a new favorite band they had just heard. In fact, if one of these drops was good enough, it could be the incentive to replay games. This isn't exclusive to licensed music, original scores definitely have this power as well. But if the music is used in just the right way, it can be that extra little bit of incentive you need to sit through a 10-hour game for an amazing 30-second moment, and it'd be worth it every single time. Sometimes these moments aim to be a lot of fun. Using a good song at a cool point in a game can elevate a scene beyond your normal standard mission. Like for example in Saints Row the Third. At one point you crash a party to take over a penthouse as your own. As you start the mission base jumping out of a helicopter to crash a rooftop party, already a wild thing to do, Kanye West's Power starts to play. It perfectly suits the rise back to fame that the Saints gang is trying to accomplish in the story. The claps and vocal chanting in the intro to Power has this amping up atmosphere to it, the beat acting as Kanye's hype man. So in the context of a video game having a hype moment, it helps you feel that energy rather than scoring with just a generic spy mission theme. In that same token, needle drops can turn an otherwise mundane mission into something much more memorable. The best example I can think of for this is Far Cry 3's Kick the Hornet's Nest, otherwise known as the weed burning mission. Which sounds interesting, but mechanically it's a lot like other quests in the game where you just go somewhere and shoot some guys, but this time taking advantage of the fire physics to burn some devil's lettuce. The part that makes this such a standout for a lot of people is that as you ignite the flamethrower and start lighting up for everyone who's downwind of the smoke, is the Ziggy Marley and Skrillex dubstep song Make It Bundem kicks in. As Jason Brody inhales smoke and the screen gets a bit wavy, the song perfectly complements the destruction of Vars's drug empire. With just your generic background music playing for this, it wouldn't have had the impact needed to really hammer home that this is the turning point in Brody's war against Vars, the point where he starts taking some of the power back. Dubstep may seem a little of its time, and it kind of is, but regardless of that fact, it still works to this day in making a very easily forgotten mission into one that will stay with you for years to come. As maybe cheesy as this moment is, it worked so well that Ubisoft have been chasing that moment a lot ever since. Far Cry 4 had the Opium Factory destruction tied to Punjabi MC's Jogi. When I got to Far Cry 5's Sins of the Father mission that involved taking out the game's drug at the center of the conflict Bliss, I was a little disappointed there wasn't a song to accompany it, but turns out it had just been shifted elsewhere. In order to break your fellow soldier out against the mind control used by the Seed family, you set up blasting the Vine's Get Free over a loudspeaker. This is extremely on the nose, but it works so well and the game knows it. The lyrics Get Free and Come In match the mission exactly, making reference to breaking the control and inviting the enemy to storm the house as you defend it. It's high octane, and since the song plays over a speaker system through the building, running around finding new vantage points just adds an air of both hype and tension in a way that not many other approaches could. Other times, a song can trick you into thinking an otherwise underwhelming or even bad moment is actually emotional and meaningful. It's not a bad trick to pull by any means, but one that can feel a little defeating once you realize it wasn't the story you connected to, but rather the song playing instead. The first Life is Strange is one such game. The two endings to Life is Strange are mixed at best and problematic at worst. I won't really go into why that is here, but if you don't know these endings, you'll just have to trust me when I say they're not that great. Despite that fact, however, the first time you finish Life is Strange, in both ways I got extremely emotional. In fact, watching the Save Arcadia ending still to this day gives me the lump in the back of my throat, kind of sad despite thinking it's a terrible ending for Max. The big reason for that is the Foles song Spanish Sahara. As the argument between Chloe and Nathan Prescott escalates right before the climax, the low kick drum of the song intro can be heard, cutting through the mix, as if to act as a slow heartbeat. And as the climax hits and all audio cuts out, and for the remainder of the ending, Spanish Sahara plays to the footage of the following events after the shooting. Foles wrote this song specifically as a long and slow build to a massive climax at the end, built on ambience of a guitar, effects, and somber vocals. As a song on its own merits, it's a very emotional experience. So with scenes of empty sunsets and a funeral, all while Yanis Philippakis sings the line, "I'm the fury in your head." It adds to the tragedy of Chloe's death, and the fact Max had to use her power to go back and let her die in order for the town to be saved. I don't think this ending was poorly received in any overwhelming sense. A lot of people say they love it all these years later, and if you do, that's great. But thinking about this ending with the song removed from it completely, I just can't help but feel let down by it. Mainly because it relies way too heavily on the bury your gaze trope that's all too common. One thing I really enjoy doing these days with the rise of YouTube and music having comment sections below them is finding songs that were needle drops and reading the stories people have attached to them. Music means so many different things to every person. It can remind them of a loved one, and that one track will help keep that memory alive. And with that, a reason to connect with strangers online. You might get that one annoying gatekeeper saying it's not okay to find out about a band through a video game, but those people forget there's a whole generation of people that grew up on Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Music can become intrinsically tied to a game so that one cannot be thought of without the other, and I think that's something truly special. I do have to mention, however, that not all needle drop moments are mechanically perfect. Even the ones I mentioned in this video do have their faults to them. Unless specifically used in a cutscene, there's always a chance of something going wrong and making it feel a bit jarring. For example, in the Saints Row 3 party crash mission, after you have successfully taken over the penthouse for your crew, you must chase someone for information, and this sequence can take just a little bit too long, so after power fades out and the in-game radio kicks in, and depending on the station, can drastically shift the tone of the sequence. These aren't game-breaking moments that make you think badly of the game. It's just a little thing that makes you realize how difficult these needle drops can be to manufacture in a way that works exactly the same for every single person playing them. Unfortunately, this isn't even the worst part of needle drops. As I said, the thing that makes a needle drop is licensed songs. And well, the unfortunate thing about our capitalist hellscape is that licenses run out. In an age of remasters, this can lead to some games having vastly different feeling experiences as a result, or even worse, be forced off of digital and physical store shelves. Although it's been reinstated now, there was a period of time where Alan Wake was completely unpurchasable outside of a physical resale, since their music license had ended. What's interesting about this is when the game was removed in 2017, it was only 7 years old, meaning that's how long the music license agreements were contracted for. Was this a lack of faith in how popular the game might become, or a serious underestimation of the movement into digital storefront boom, or just one of those things that happened? Although not technically needle drops, at least in the sense I've talked about here, it's worth mentioning that we've hit a point in how long GTA 5 has been out, and how it still remained relevant, that some of the songs have started to be swapped out due to the expiration of licenses. So many of these moments could have their own dedicated video about them. Picking a song that already exists and reappropriating it for a whole new context to give it a new life is truly something special. And even just finding that right song is a unique skill. It's why Hideo Kojima's work is praised, in part, because his ear for song selection is hard to match. But whatever the context, it's hard not to find a new favorite song within the good, bad, or even weird needle drops in video games. Thank you to Dinosaur Polo Club for sponsoring this video. Being from Aotearoa, New Zealand is weird sometimes. You don't like to be patriotic except for when something from here hits the international stage. So every time a homegrown game gets released, I love to talk about it, and well, this is one such case. Mini Motorways is a fantastic puzzle game that I genuinely love to play in my downtime between working on things. It's such an easy recommendation that is, currently as of this video coming out, even easier to make since there is a New Zealand game developer sale happening right now on Steam. From the 19th of August to the 23rd New Zealand time, a bunch of Kiwi-made games are on sale, including the wonderful Mini Motorways. If a puzzle game isn't your exact speed, I might also recommend the dog owner dating game Best Friend Forever, or the 2018 low polygonal Souls-like Ashen. Whatever your type of game might be, Aotearoa's thriving game development scene is sure to have you covered. Even if you are watching this after the sale, make sure to look up Dinosaur Polo Club and their game Mini Motorways. Thank you again to them for sponsoring this video.
Light me up that cigarette and I'll strap shoes on my feet. Got to find a reason things went wrong. Got to find a reason why my money's all gone. Ooh.
I got a dimension, and I can still get high.
You know it.
I can play the guitar like a motherfucking riot. That's the one.
Play your guitar. You can do it.